for Business is presented by Eagle Broadcasting Corporation and Globe My Business. Create your success.
Greetings from the Philippines to the world. It's April 27, 2019, 5:03 p.m. here in Manila. We are on Facebook Live on Eagle News and also on our digital channel eaglenewslive.com. Watch the video also in the Eagle News channel on YouTube. I am Cesar Vallejos. We are open for business. Join me discover the latest news and information in business around the world. Stay ahead of the curve from vision to action. The peso is 52.24 against the dollar, and at the closing of trade last Friday, the Philippine Stock Exchange Index closed at 7,868.28, down 26.17 points or 0.33%. We have heard the government say that to promote investments, create jobs, and reduce poverty, a tax system that is simpler, fairer, and more efficient system should be in place. This will ensure that Filipinos will receive the necessary social services and infrastructure that are needed and help big and small businesses continue to thrive. Where are we now in the area of tax reform? What has been improved so far after more than a year of the implementation of the tax reform program? How are individual taxpayers and small and medium enterprises affected so far? What are we expecting this 2019 as officials act on the reforms as envisioned by the government? We are privileged this afternoon to be visited by the Department of Finance Assistant Secretary Anthony Lambino II to provide us updates on the train law and share opportunities for SMEs to get access to financial support and other programs from both the private and government sector. ASEC Tony will join us after these stories from our business news provider, Business Mirror. Grab expects e-wallet users in the Philippines to double this year. Philippines-China Inc. economic deals at Belt Road Forum. Petron guarantees enough supply for local market during maintenance break in May. And here are the details. Grab Philippines expects to double the number of its electronic wallet users in the country by end of 2019 with the initial execution of its partnership with SM Investments Corporation, one of the nation's top conglomerates in the retail, banking, and property industries. Grab Philippines President Brian Koo said the usage of their payment gateway within their app, which used to be limited only to their transportation network vehicle services, and Grab Express is less than 20%. So we're starting off with a low base. The penetration in the country is also low for cashless. If you don't double its adoption by the local market every year, you're doing something wrong, he said. With its expanded application to other services, GrabPay user base in the Philippines has dramatically grown by 130% from the first quarter of 2018 up to the present. We want to grow it by at least the same number, so double the current figure, he said, without citing the exact target number of e-wallet users nationwide. Koo, however, said payment in itself will not be a huge contributor to the company's top line. The bulk of their business, he said, would still come from the transport portfolio as food is catching up. The leaders of the Philippines and China meeting in Beijing signed deals on production capacity and investment cooperation, as well as on drug rehabilitation amid rising tensions in the West Philippine Sea. Both President Duterte and Chinese President Xi Jinping witnessed the event on Thursday at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing shortly after their leaders' bilateral meeting. Duterte's meeting with a Chinese leader comes at a time that the Philippine government has been issuing strong statements against China's actions in the disputed waters, including the presence of hundreds of Chinese vessels around Pag-asa Island in Palawan, among others. Malacanang said the exchange of letters on production capacity and investment cooperation between the Philippines and China proposes a project list which will serve as the focus of cooperation between the National Economic and Development Authority and the National Development and Reform Commission. Socioeconomic Planning Secretary Ernesto Pernia and Chairman He Lifeng of NDRC signed a document on behalf of the two countries, according to Presidential Spokesman and Chief Presidential Legal Counsel Salvador Panelo. The second agreement, the Handover Certificate Grant Aid for the Dangerous Drugs Abuse Treatment and Rehabilitation Centers project, is a ceremonial handover of the drug treatment facilities in Sarangani and Agusan del Norte provided by China through the grant. Petron Corporation said on Thursday its refinery in Bataan has enough supply to service the market during the conduct of maintenance activities that will start next month. We assure our customers we have ample inventory to supply the requirements of our domestic market, the country's largest oil refiner said. Petron provides nearly 40% of the country's fuel requirements through its Bataan refinery, 30 terminals, and over 2,400 service stations nationwide. Petron's refinery in Limay, Bataan was forced to go into an emergency shutdown following the strong earthquake that affected Central Luzon and Metro Manila on April 22. The 6.1 magnitude earthquake triggered the protective stripping of certain refinery units, resulting in the emergency shutdown. This was followed by the flaring of gases, an important safety measure in refinery facilities due to the absence of an alternative power supply. When open for business returns, we will have DOF Assistant Secretary Anthony Lambino II. Open for business will return. Stay with us.
Open for Business is presented by Globe My Business. Create your success.
We are open for business, and we are here with DOF Assistant Secretary Antonio Lambino II. Asek Tony, thank you very much for coming po.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, Cesar. Salamat.
Asek Tony, there's a lot of developments already, and I'm sure you have also notified the audiences and the general public about the many developments happening with train law. So far, sir, how do you assess the implementation of train law so far?
Yeah, and thank you for asking, Cesar. There's a lot of controversy and misinformation, but there's also, based on the evidence, quite good news about the train law. No? So let's deal with that first, and then we can go into the issues that I know many people care about, and rightfully so. But in terms of the performance of the law, and this was signed by President Duterte in December of 2017. It was implemented starting January 2018. In terms of its main objectives of making the tax system fairer, simpler, and more efficient, we have made enormous strides in those directions. First, there was a problem with our personal income tax system for 2 decades. for 20 years, we had not adjusted our income tax brackets. And so what happened was, as people's income increased over time, because inflation and and other factors led to higher take-home, nominal take-home pay, people were being moved into higher and higher tax brackets, even though relative to the richest households, they were not really making more than those groups, and yet they were moving into the same tax bracket as the highest personal income taxpayers. So what Train did first and foremost was it adjusted the personal income tax brackets so that it would be fairer to especially those who do not earn as much as the top 1%. And so because of that, 99% of income taxpayers now pay or now take home more, equivalent to roughly a 14th month pay spread out over the year. And that is true for everyone earning less than 8 million. No? And also we increased the threshold for exemption from what used to be just the minimum wage, now up to 250,000 pesos.
Correct.
And so people have more money in the pocket because of that. However, the experience was mixed. And we understand because inflation was pretty high last year. And so what was done? The most important thing that was done was a focus on agricultural supply. Because when we looked at the data, the main drivers of inflation were the key agricultural products of rice, fish, meat, and vegetables. And so the policy response and the urgent and the immediate response, starting because the inflation rate started going up May, June, July, and it hit its peak August, September, October, and then it started coming down. Why did it start coming down? It was because the urgent response was to make food supply more plentiful, to make the agricultural products that I mentioned earlier easier to import, so that we could address the tight supply situation that we had. Over the long term, we need to do many other things. We need to improve agricultural productivity. We've taken a very important step in tarifying rice. But those are things that we need to address not just in the short term response being the increase in imports, but the long-term response in making sure that the livelihood of our farmers is better and that they are able to be more productive.
But in terms, sir, of the vision of the government in creating this tax reform is basically, of course, number one, to alleviate poverty. But sir, is there an assessment already on from your side where you really have measured or assessed the impact of the tax reform per different sectors of the government? Because
So-
originally, sir, we're also
Yes.
hearing some comments that it's only the ones in the upper bracket who are benefiting, but not necessarily the ones who should really, the larger mass base, who should really take the impact.
Yes, which is what I was trying to explain, Cesar. 99% of
Yes.
income taxpayers are now taking home more money. Except that experience was countervailed by the high inflation rate, primarily due to agricultural products and the tight supply. Now, so because of those things that happened late last year, the higher take-home pay was not really felt yet. However, the law, until a new law is passed in this regard, the law has made it a permanent feature of our tax system. So now, as inflation has come down, it was around 5.2% last year.
Correct.
For the first quarter of 2019, I'm happy to report it's
Yes.
3.8%.
Yes.
Percent, no? And so the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas has said that it's very likely that we will be within our target range this year. So first, I wanted to address that. But in terms of the performance of the law, in revenue generation, it has been also very successful. In fact, for 2018, the train's performance in revenues is at 108.1% relative to the target. So it overperformed in terms of the revenues it generated that we are
That's
spending.
for the 2018
for the full year, yes.
For the full year.
Yeah, 108.1% relative to target. No? So around 68 billion versus 63 billion. And that amount is invested now and starting last year, in social protection programs and social investments, 30% earmarked in the law, and 70% earmarked for infrastructure. And another piece of good news that I would like to share is that in terms of infrastructure investment, which has the most number of multiplier effects for the economy, right? And we're not just talking about big infrastructure projects. We're also talking about the small road, the farm-to-market road, the health facility in the province or in the municipality, the school buildings that are being built because of the congestion in our public school system. So all of those projects amount to around more than 10,000 infrastructure projects that are ongoing at any given time. And it is only starting in 2018 that we were able to hit and exceed our target for infrastructure investment. We were at 5.1% of our gross domestic product. This is unprecedented. It has not happened in history that we have hit that 5% target. It has always been 2 to 3%, roughly. So now
and this is for infrastructure.
Yes,
Okay.
and so in 2018 we finally achieved our goal for infra investment. At the same time, earlier this year, the President signed into law the Universal Healthcare Law.
Yeah.
And that is also the first time that we will have universal healthcare in the Philippines. That includes inpatient and outpatient coverage for every Filipino. So we must make sure that our infrastructure or hard investments are matched by human investments. Better education, better healthcare. The K-12 program is becoming more and more mature as the Department of Education implements it year after year. The free tuition in state universities and colleges is also now a reality. So we make investments in the Filipino people, and we make investments in the logistics network that unleash the potential of our workforce, of the Filipino worker, in order that our livelihoods improve throughout the country and that businesses improve as well.
Sir, before I ask additional follow-up questions on infrastructure and healthcare, I'd just like to go back to inflation. So you're saying, sir, that even without, if there were no challenges as far as inflation last year, that could have been the time that the 99.9 Filipinos could have felt the impact of the train law to their take-home pay.
So 99% of personal income taxpayers.
Yes, personal.
Yes, of course there are those who had not been paying personal income tax because they were minimum wage earners, and so what they benefit from is the better infrastructure, better healthcare, better education programs. But for those who were paying personal income taxes, then now the threshold for exemption is much higher at 250,000 a year, and the tax brackets are more fair, are fairer because only the top 1%, those earning 8 million and above, are paying a 35% tax rate now. Everybody else has higher take-home pay.
And sir, as you said, with that impact, are we saying, sir, that and you mentioned about the link between inflation and the agricultural supply, because of that, of the learnings of the government and maybe the private sector also in that case, do you think that the challenges that will address inflation will not happen this year as far as agricultural supply is concerned?
Well, we need to watch this very carefully. In terms of rice, which was the biggest contributor in terms of agricultural commodities, we have solved that issue in terms of supply, because we passed the Rice Tarification Law, or the Rice Liberalization Act. The President signed it earlier this year, and it is now in effect. And so now imports are going to be a little more plentiful, but at the same time, from the tariff, because in the past we were under a quantitative restriction regime, which is a quota system.
Okay.
Now that we have a tariff system, the tariffs are 100% earmarked for the improvement of the livelihoods of our rice farmers. So that's at least 10 billion pesos a year in the Rice Competitiveness Enhancement Fund, which will be spent on mechanization so that the productivity is much higher, better seeds, training, and access to credit. So all of
And
those
education,
things,
because I
yes,
think
training is
Yeah,
included
correct.
for our rice farmers, whether they want to continue planting rice because it is economically efficient to do so in their area, or if they want to do it because in let's say some upland rain-fed areas, they have special varieties like heirloom rice varieties in the Cordilleras up north, the Arakan Valley in Mindanao, and these, even though the yield is not as high as what you would expect from irrigated broad and vast rice lands, even though the production is a little more limited, international markets have very high demand for these heirloom rice varieties. So it's also worth exploring, no, how to help our farmers capture more value from their hard work, as opposed to other players in the market benefiting from all of that back-breaking work of planting and harvesting rice. So rice is the key commodity. The others that contributed to inflation, we need to do better also. So for instance, vegetables were also high in terms of price increases toward the end of last year. Or the third quarter of last year, it started coming down after the typhoon season. That just goes to show there's really a problem with our logistics capacity. We need to keep improving our infrastructure so that those vegetables can come to the markets from up north to Metro Manila or Calabarzon or other areas where there is demand. Kaso, when we don't have the infrastructure network that allows for these products to get to the market in a timely way, the crop is wasted. Nabubulok, basically. So on vegetables, we need to keep improving our logistics. For fishing and our fisheries sector, we need a more sustainable fishing and aquaculture industry. Why? Because our fish supply has been on a downward trend for many years now. It's not just last year when fish supply has been tight. So we need to keep improving our fishing industry in a way that is more sustainable, so that we don't keep overfishing our seas. It's ironic because we're an archipelago. No?
Yes.
So we really need a more sustainable fishing policy and a set of practices in the Philippines. Yeah.
Okay. The good thing, sir, that we also notice, of course, is the very, very strong infrastructure development that's going on because of the current build campaign of the government. Now, sir, can you also tell us the link of infrastructure with train law? Like, say, of course, you mentioned about infrastructure development and healthcare program. So, in terms of that law or the collections of the government, how much or how big is the allocation or budget for those two things that you mentioned?
Well, 70% is
Wow.
earmarked for infrastructure.
Okay.
30% for social protection programs.
Okay.
So for infrastructure, we of course have a better fiscal space because of the train law. But we also have in the national budget very sizable appropriations for not just the 75 flagship projects such as the Metro Manila Subway, the Mindanao Railway, so many major bridges in the Visayas, and highways all over the country. All of that is part of our infrastructure development plan. But we also have, as I mentioned earlier, tens of thousands of smaller infrastructure projects that are felt in the provinces, in the far-flung areas, that did not have previously access to efficient logistics. Why is this important? A, the quality of life of the Filipino family is much improved if people can get to work or to other places they need to be efficiently. And it doesn't take them hours and hours every day to get to work and to get home. It's the quality of life of the Filipino family that we also want to support. We want parents to spend time with their children, family members to be with their loved ones, people to have time to self-actualize outside of work. Now, of course, work helps us self-actualize, but there are other things we can do with our time if we're not spending it in traffic all the time. We can pursue the arts, we can read great novels or books. And so that's one. The second thing we want to do is improve the logistics capacity for our small and medium enterprises, even our micro enterprises. We would like products to get to markets more efficiently. In fact, some estimates I've seen say that the price of a good in the market is 40% transportation cost. We really want to lower that. So that
What's your target po?
well, what we want to do is to improve the logistics network all over the country, not just in terms of the major ports and seaports and highways and bridges, but also the provincial roads, the provincial bridges, the farm to market network, the pathways that people traverse on a day-to-day basis to get from home to school, to work, and to other places.
Actually, even when with our previous coverages, agriculture is just one of the many sectors where infrastructure is needed. Like for example, when we covered sustainable tourism, they also would want to put a lot of the big problem there is infrastructure. So okay,
It takes for some of our best tourism spots, and these are the ones that a lot of people go to. You need 4 or 5 modes of transportation for an international tourist to get there, and even our local tourists have to suffer through all of these multimodal and inefficient networks. So we really need to improve that. But again, most important, I think, is the quality of life of the Filipino family. We want to make sure that families are able to spend more time together also.
So now, sir, before we go into a break, so you said that there are 75 priority projects under
The flagship under
projects,
build.
and then there's 10,000 smaller
More than
10,000 smaller infrastructure projects. So will this respond to the infrastructure issues, and at what certain some sort of target do you have, to complete these priority projects?
Well, at this point, we have met our goal of higher than 5% of GDP spent on infrastructure in 2018. By 2022, we want to get to 7% of GDP invested in infrastructure. And that will catapult the productivity and the efficiency of various aspects of life, including, of course, business and entrepreneurship, because we want to support our micro, small, and medium enterprises in having a more even playing field. And I'm happy to talk about package 2 of the tax reform program, because that is the main goal there, to lower the corporate income tax rate for corporations, especially micro, small, and medium enterprises.
Now, we will talk about Train 2 when Open for Business returns. Stay with us. Open for Business is back, and still with me is ASEC Tony of the Department of Finance. Sir, before we ask you about Train 2, I would just like to raise this figure that even if poverty went down 6.6%,
In the first half
in the
of
first
2018
half.
versus the first half of 2015.
Yes.
Yes.
But Train, quote unquote, likely exacerbated Philippine poverty by 0.26%. What's your comment on that, sir?
Yeah, I think you might be referring to a few studies that were made. Of course, there are other studies that show the opposite. And
Okay.
what's the difference between these two sets of studies? When we looked at the ones that said that poverty was exacerbated first half, because we need to take a look at that very closely, because the whole goal is to reduce poverty.
Exactly.
Right? So yes, we take those findings very seriously. And what we noticed is it actually did not include one of the studies that claimed this did not include the unconditional cash transfers that are part of the train law. The 30% that I mentioned earmarked for social protection. So that's 2,400 pesos for around 10 million recipients. We got to 9.2 million recipients by early this year. So if you don't include the unconditional cash transfers, then you don't have a complete picture of how the law affected the lowest deciles. The second thing that one of the studies did not include are the benefits from infrastructure investments. Because not only do we improve our experience as commuters and as entrepreneurs or as small business people, we are also creating a lot of jobs. And if we look at the numbers, it's at least 15 billion pesos per month in additional wages from infrastructure. So if you don't include that in the estimate, and you don't include the unconditional cash transfers, then again the studies will come up with an incomplete picture. So we urge all of us to take a look at these studies, whether they say poverty got better, meaning was reduced, or was increased, and let's look at whether these studies actually account for the main features of the law. Because again, social protection programs such as the unconditional cash transfers and the Pantawid Pasada, those were included in the design of the law. Yeah.
But in terms of your vision, how low, in terms of measurement of the Philippine poverty, what's the target after the corporate tax reform program has been implemented?
Well, there are actually 5 packages in the comprehensive tax reform program. Train was the first.
Yeah.
The second is called the Trabajo Bill, no? For the corporate tax reform. But what our overall goal is in terms of the socio-economic development of the country, it's 1 million fewer Filipinos in poverty every year between 2016 and 2022. So that's the yardstick by which we want to measure whether we are succeeding or not succeeding in terms of our economic development. 1 million fewer Filipinos who are poor every year,
Okay.
lifted from poverty.
Okay. Now, sir, we go to Train 2. The main issue here that we are saying is, of course, there are sectors that who want to go straight to 20% reduction. There's also some chambers of commerce who agree to exactly what the Philippine government proposes.
And there are those who don't.
Yes.
It's a contentious issue.
So where is it now,
Yes.
sir? Where are we now?
Well, for package 2, which is the corporate income tax reduction package and fiscal incentives modernization. So those are the 2 main pieces of that package. For train package 1, it was lowering personal income taxes while increasing contributions of those who had private vehicles, who like to drink a lot of sweetened beverages, and who smoked. Now, those were the ones we asked to contribute more because either they can afford it more than others, or they will access the public health system more than others later. For package 2, what we want to do is lower corporate income taxes for 99.6% of companies in the Philippines. Most of them micro, small, and medium enterprises. And from 30%, we would like to reduce the corporate income tax rate to 20% over a 10-year period. 2% every 2 years. Why do we have to do it that way? Because we want to do it in a fiscally responsible manner. Not only do we want to make the right investments, we also want to show all of those who will lend us resources, whether it's money or help us in our development journey through other types of collaboration and support. We need to show them that we are doing things in a fiscally responsible way so that they know that our growth and our development is sustainable. Because if you give everything away right away, while, parts of our hearts would like to do that, because we see suffering, we see pain all around us, we see poverty, and we want to address it as fast as possible. If the path to doing that is not sustainable, then maybe you can do it for a day or two or a year or two. But after that, you're putting the country in a very bad fiscal position. We cannot sustain those types of dole-outs and giveaways. No? So we have to really balance everything. And so lowering corporate income taxes by 10% from 30 to 20 has to be offset by modernizing our incentive system. Incentives are essentially, the fiscal incentives I'm talking about are the special tax rates that are given to some investors so that they come into the country and ideally create jobs, invest in the countryside, bring new research and technology to the country. Those are good reasons to give incentives. Except we've been giving them for the past 50 years and we have not made them performance-based. We do not require that. To keep an incentive, you have to create those jobs that you promised you would create. You have to invest outside of the more urban areas into the countryside where economic activity is most needed. You have to bring in that research and technology that can be used by other companies, other firms over time. Because they will learn from what that company is doing in the country. So we want to keep giving incentives for those reasons, but there has to be a performance check. Are you really delivering? And if you are, then by all means, please enjoy the incentive. Second, it has to be time-bound. Some companies have been receiving incentives for more than 40 years.
Wow.
It's a
What
classic.
sector po yan?
Some in electronics, some in others. But the bottom line is this: even our children, we give them, allowance until they graduate from college. When they get their jobs and are earning on their own, at a certain point, siguro we should not be giving them an allowance anymore, no? Because they're self-sustaining at that point. So in the same way, we should support companies and investors who need help in the beginning. But after 20, 30 years, the expectation is if you cannot survive and do well without the incentive, then maybe there's something wrong with your business model, right?
But sorry.
So go ahead. No, it's okay.
But the thing is, this is a big issue to some sectors. Like you said, it has to be performance based. So some
And
sectors
time-bound.
and
Yes.
time-bound
And transparent. Yeah.
So some of the people say, like, say for example, the BPO sector, they will contest that we're already doing good. We're actually contributing a lot of dollars to the Philippine economy, and if this will be implemented, it will be that sector who will definitely be affected. And some of the contentions is that trabajo will ironically reduce number of jobs in that sector. What's your comment?
So we understand that concern, and it is a very important one. First, it's called the Trabajo Bill. Therefore, it should create jobs. It should not. On average, what we see by 2021 or 22 is an additional 1.4 million jobs. That's based on the estimates that we've made. Whether a job will stay or not in the BPO sector, we believe has much less to do with the tax incentive regime and a lot more to do with how we shift into higher value jobs in that sector because of AI,
Yeah.
because of artificial intelligence. The biggest threat to the voice part of BPO is AI. It's not the tax incentives. No. So
Okay.
what we need to do is work with industry to prepare our workforce to shift to knowledge processing, knowledge process outsourcing as opposed to BPO. No? Higher value jobs,
Yeah.
higher skilled jobs, dealing with data, spreadsheets, information, etc., and being able to compete in that area. Because voice is really gonna go down. And
Yeah.
some say very, very soon, some say soon, some say over the medium term. Right? Regardless
So
of
when
who
you
you're
say
talking-
high values, or one of this, of course, is KPO, the
Yes.
knowledge process also. Are there other areas where you would really prefer to, incentivize?
Well, we've had several consultations with the industry associations, no? And we've talked about upskilling programs.
Oh, yeah.
And they
Okay.
are very well placed to feeling the stones in the water as you cross the river. Kasi sila yung nandun sa industry. So,
Yes.
as they feel the stones in the water, then we can figure out what kind of training programs do we need to be in place so that we are ready for the jobs of the future. But we need to work together on that. And not just insist that we have to keep our tax incentives and the special treatment. No? What we want to do through the Trabaho Bill is incentivize new investments with a superior menu of incentives. Especially if you will create jobs, you will bring investment to the countryside, and you will bring new research and technology to the Philippines. All of these things are good reasons to give incentives. But again, it shouldn't be forever. Because in the area of incentives, it is only the Philippines na may forever. We are the only country, because we give a 5% GIE forever deal to corporations, that does this forever. Other
Okay.
countries, 20 years maximum.
Okay.
No, and we can of course look at our competition and make sure that our menu of incentives is indeed superior in some ways and competitive at the very least.
Nasaan na siya ngayon, sir? With that, what's the timeline now? Assuming, a new Congress, opening of the Congress, where, in terms of implementing it, with the, like, say, for example, we had the late passage of the budget, and we have this Trabaho Bill. So how do you now try to adapt or cope with your own targets with the government?
Well, the Trabaho Bill will probably be refiled in the next Congress, no, the 18th Congress. It looks like the runway for the 17th Congress is very short. But we are hoping for one of the packages to make it through.
Which is the
Package 2 Plus, which is the
Okay.
sin tax package for universal healthcare financing.
Okay.
As I mentioned earlier, the President signed into law one of the most important pieces of legislation that has been signed in a long time, the Universal Healthcare Law. We want to make sure that the Filipino people is healthy. We want to make sure that the demographic dividend that we are moving into really allows us to take advantage of our young and well-educated workforce. Now, let me share a tidbit about our demography. We have a workforce and a population, the average age of which is around 24 years old.
Okay.
In the industrialized part of Asia and the region, many of our neighbors are aging, meaning there are a lot more senior citizens or older citizens. And what that makes us is the natural partner of these countries. And we're talking about Japan, we're talking about, I think, maybe Korea and many other countries in the region.
So it's really our competitive advantage.
It is our long-term competitive advantage. And we have to make sure our workforce is healthy and educated. As we move into that space, that is what will keep us on the road to becoming a high-income country by 2040. This year, toward the end of this year or early next year, we graduate to upper middle income country status from lower middle income country status. We have to keep on our economic trajectory so that we make it to high income country status within a generation. That is the kind of Philippines I would very much like my daughter to inherit from our generation. I'm sure any parent would feel the same way.
Yeah, we heard that too, Tony, but there are caveats then, on that. So,
Of
like for
course.
example, if you are now, like say, if the Philippines would belong to that upper middle income country, we will somehow lose the free trade agreements or the
concessional,
incentives. Yes,
the concessional lending.
correct. So
are
that will impact
given.
on again
Well, that will happen in a
agriculture
few years. After we are able to move into the next category. However, let me share this also. I mean, if
Okay.
you look at the Japan Credit Rating Agency report, they have just upgraded our credit rating again from stable to positive at the level that we're at. We're investment grade with Moody's. We're investment grade with S&P. We're investment grade with Fitch. What does that mean? That means for the private sector and for our bonds, no? We're being priced very well in the global market. And for the private sector to access financing, it becomes cheaper also. As we keep being fiscally responsible, we make sure we pass the right legislation in order to pay our bills. Like for instance, we have universal healthcare. Let's pass the sin tax law, the bill that will hopefully become law soon, so that it is clear to everyone that we can pay for it. Now, that's how we have to move forward. No, we give the Filipino people the best that we can give. In terms of healthcare, education, logistics, and infrastructure. At the same time, we show ourselves, we prove to ourselves and all who are watching us that we are doing the right things that will allow us to pay for all of these things sustainably over the long term. That's what will get us to high income country status and a Philippines that has zero extreme poverty. Again, within a generation. As I was going through school, I thought I had this romantic notion that we would have to dedicate a big part of our lives to poverty reduction. I did not imagine that we could end extreme poverty within my lifetime. I'm only realizing that now as we see that, you know what, the trajectory of the country is
Yes.
pretty good in that regard. Again, that is our hope, that is our vision, that's where we want to go. It's realistic. What do we do now? Now we make sure that we keep investing in the people and that we improve health. And when we say health, we're not just talking about the day-to-day health. We're talking about reducing maternal mortality, infant mortality, making sure in the first 1,000 days, children are getting the right nutrition, so we reduce stunting of the mind and of the body. No? All of those things will allow us to keep also on our development trajectory.
Tony, we'll spend the few minutes remaining to discuss initiatives of the government to the audience that is really close to our hearts, small and medium enterprises, micro, small and medium enterprises. Sir, what are the initiatives of the government to support them?
MSMEs.
Especially, sir, access to credit or any financial institution, and because a lot of them would really want to go into business. Like we have student entrepreneurs who are also watching and listening. So, in terms of support, financial access, what are the initiatives of the government, and maybe you can also share access to the private sector in terms of MSME development, sir.
Yeah. Well, as we mentioned earlier, the tax reform package 2, the Trabajo bill, is really geared toward lowering the corporate income tax rate for the large majority of our companies in the Philippines, which are micro, small, and medium enterprises. In terms of financial technology, that is a very exciting area where we can leverage the advances in cell phone technology, in digital tools, etc., so that there is better access to finance, that people are able to start their businesses and grow their businesses without being vulnerable to loan sharks. No? If I may recommend looking at the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas website, they have a very strong focus on fintech and financial inclusion, giving people access to credit, to other products and services through maybe their cell phones or through local networks that they can access in their own areas. Also, the Land Bank has a number of financial technology and financial inclusion initiatives that have very much to do with leveraging digital and cell phone technology.
Sir, being, a millennial yourself,
I'm not. But thank you for saying that. I'm actually a few years shy of making it to that cutoff.
Okay. So there's a lot of talk about digital natives.
Yes.
And of course, I am a digital migrant. So now
Same,
with the
same. I'm the same.
so with the financial inclusion and with the use of technology in business, in finance, what do you think will happen in terms of all these reforms with the finance department, with taxes, and I heard also a lot of institutions who would want to really digitalize the government system. For example, sir, there is an issue that, when they say a genuine tax reform would only be really possible, would really be genuine if there is administrative reform.
Absolutely.
So, like say for example, the automation is an administrative reform. Pero sir, hindi naman ako nagbibigay ng budget. So, what's your take on that?
No, the digital transformation agenda is part of TRAIN and is part of the comprehensive tax reform program. So in terms of the citizen experience, for instance, in paying taxes, the digital transformation agenda is something that is being designed already. In fact, the initial rollout of the tools, that's already happening, but we can't do it right away because for everybody we need to test it first with a few initial users so that we make sure there are no glitches. But the rollout of digital technologies in the area of tax administration, that's already happening. We are also going to streamline submissions. Sometimes you're being asked to put in data into a form that you've already submitted through another form.
Correct.
Right? And so that has to be streamlined as well. If it's already been submitted through one form, we shouldn't ask for it anymore again. Because what's happening is you're putting a burden on the taxpayer, on those who actually want to do the right thing, and making it hard, diba? So, and that wasn't done on purpose. It just happens because there are so many rules and regulations that get passed over time. So we need to make sure we rationalize that. No? And that's happening as we speak. The other area that's very exciting in the digital space is e-invoicing. So that we don't do it manually anymore. No? So part of the TRAIN law is this e-invoicing initiative that the Korean government is helping us with because they're very good at it in Korea. So we're already doing the pilot study or designing the pilot study, and this is for rollout in 2020. So all of these tax administration improvements, leveraging technology, you're absolutely right. It doesn't make sense to do a tax reform without improving administration. That being said, if I may share, we are at a historic, let's say a 2-decade high in terms of our tax effort. We have not done as well in our collections, in our revenue generation for decades. Well, we hit around 14.7% of GDP for our tax effort, and that is the best we've done in 2 decades. So at the same time, as the digital transformation is being rolled out, slowly but surely, No? We're also doing better in terms of collection. And so all of that together has put us in a place where, as I mentioned earlier, our credit ratings are looking good. We have to keep working on it so we get to the A rating that we desire for our investors, our people, our businesses, etc. We have to make sure we keep investing in the Filipino people, and we have to make sure we have sustainable sources of financing for that. We have to make sure that paying taxes is easy or as easy as possible, and that digital financial technologies are available to especially micro, small, and medium enterprises and our entrepreneurs.
Well said, sir. Last question, sir, before I ask you to send your message to our viewers. Late yung budget, and we are hearing a lot of talk that it can affect the GDP growth. So with the late passage, what is the figure that you're looking at in terms of the economic growth, and how do you think the government can cope to reach its original target?
Well, the estimate in terms of the GDP impact, the negative impact of the reenacted budget, was made for the full year. Should there had been a full year reenactment, no, but we only had a reenacted budget till a few weeks ago, a week or two ago.
Yes.
So what does that mean? That means that the estimate has to be adjusted. No? But it was anywhere from 1.1 to 2 point something percent lower GDP if we had operated under a reenacted budget for the whole of 2019. So let's look at what the new estimate is, given that we only operated under a reenacted budget till April, effectively. No? Now, there is a catch-up plan that is being put in place.
Okay.
It is essentially 24/7 infrastructure investment.
Wow.
No? In areas where we can catch up. It's not that easy nor that simple, by the way, because the best time to build is January to March.
Yes.
Because of the weather. No?
Correct.
It's once the rains start coming, it's very difficult to do construction relative to the first quarter of the year. So this catch-up plan will be as ambitious as possible, but we won't be able to make up for the January to March completely.
Okay.
There will be a negative impact. Let's wait for the more precise estimate. But despite that, and last year, despite global headwinds and everyone predicting that things would be not as good as we expected, that was true to a certain extent. But guess what? In the end, we grew at a very respectable 6.2%. That if you compare that with our competitors globally, we did quite well. No? It's a very respectable growth rate, and we need to keep growing at that level so that we get to that 2040 vision, yung ambition natin ng NEDA. That I mentioned
And
earlier.
we're also reading, sir, that I think it's Asia is contributing a lot to the growth in the global economy.
Indeed. And we are in the fastest growing region of the world. And even with that, we are still one of the best performing among those in the fastest growing region.
Okay, sir, there's a lot of entrepreneurs, startups, small businessmen who are watching now. With all the reforms and the projects and the various initiatives that the government is doing, what's your message? How will these affect their businesses?
Well, we consulted the micro, small, and medium enterprise community last year. We have this annual consultative workshop called Sulong Pilipinas. And last year, we worked with the Department of Trade and Industry, the Small and Medium Enterprise Bureau, to visit different parts of the country where we could consult these entrepreneurs. And we gave them updates as well as asked them for what our priorities should be. And the number one priority that our MSME owners told us should be the focus is agricultural productivity. So I think this is a space to watch. Everybody is going to be focusing on this and caring deeply about it. Let's have sustainable agricultural growth and development. And it's not just going to be in the area of crops and commodities, because as you develop your core agricultural capacity, you're also improving the capacity for food manufacturing. You're also improving our ability to be more export competitive. We are also improving so many other aspects, no, of our food security, of other things that impact the lives of the Filipino people and the Philippine industry. So please watch this space. If you are in agriculture, please be as innovative and please use research and technology and agricultural science and all of those good things that places like the International Rice Research Institute works on, Phil Rice, all of these applications of science and technology in agriculture and food manufacturing, they are so important for the competitiveness of the Philippines now moving forward.
Thank you very much, Asek Tony. And we hope that the Assistant Secretary can visit again when Trabajo is approved. And we hope to get more insights and developments from the Secretary. Our term of the week and our code of the day when Open for Business returns. And thank you very much, Asek Tony, for gracing Open for Business.
Thank you, Caesar, and thank you to everybody who is tuned in.
We'll be back. Open for Business returns. In our term of the week, you take a refresher of business terms to make you updated, more informed, and ready to make smarter business decisions. Our term of the week is LC, or Letter of Credit. A letter of credit is a letter from a bank guaranteeing that a buyer's payment to a seller will be received on time and for the correct amount. In the event that the buyer is unable to make payment on the purchase, the bank will be required to cover the full or remaining amount of the purchase. Due to the nature of international dealings, including factors such as distance, differing laws in each country, and difficulty in knowing each party personally, the use of letters of credit has become a very important aspect of international trade. And our quote of the week is from Benjamin Franklin. He said, "Beware of little expenses. A small leak will sink a great ship." Join us again next Saturday, 5 p.m. Philippine time, for another episode of Open for Business, where we discuss business information, deliver the latest business news to keep you informed and open for business and be ahead of the curve from vision to action. You're on Facebook Live on Eagle News, and you can watch us again in the video section of the Eagle News Facebook page and on eaglenewslive.com. Also visit postinglive.com for news and updates on Open for Business. Catch me later at 9 p.m. and every Wednesday also at 9 p.m. on Net25's Eagle News International as I report more business news here and around the world. For Open for Business, this is Cesar Vallejos. Have a great day.
Open for Business was presented by Eagle Broadcasting Corporation and Globe My Business. Create your success.